I think it's really important to remember the Holocaust because obviously it's great to obviously educate people. I mean, I've learned so much more today from hearing it from Evie, and I think the more we can talk about it, the more we can educate people about it. Obviously, you know, that's what it's about, really, you know. Hi Evie, it's so good to meet you.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you as well and to see you on this lovely day.
And I know you've got so much to tell me. I've obviously read up a little bit on your story, and I must admit I was a little bit nervous about meeting you because of what an unbelievable life you've been through, and you're still here to tell the story. I can't even imagine what it's like, but you know.
Well, it's also great for me to be in the presence of you, but we'll talk about me because that's what we're supposed to be doing. I was born in Germany in a medium-sized city called Halle, and I was 2 years old when Hitler came to power. I was living with my mom and my dad, and I had a sister Ruth who was a year older than me, and also my widowed grandfather was also living with us at the time. Hitler came to power, and right away we knew.
So what year was it that Hitler came into power?
1933.
1933, okay.
1933 in January.
Okay.
Right at the beginning of the year. And signs went up in all over the city, and it said, Jews forbidden, no Jews here.
Yeah.
And they just posted all over the place. So right away, you're a Jewish person. I was 2 years old. Nazis in uniforms seemed to be all over the street. They were marching everywhere. And my mother told me that they would parade down the middle of the street, and then you'd have to stop and watch the parade and raise your hand and shout Heil Hitler. We lived in an apartment house, and the ground floor of this quite large building was occupied by a mini department store, and that was my father's business.
Yeah.
In 1933, after Hitler had been in power for a few months, they printed a circular, and they listed all the Jewish businesses in our city.
Wow.
You know, and his name was on there. So the business is declining. My father decided that we needed to leave the country. So my father decided that we would go to what was then known as Palestine. It was the mandate of the British, and that's what became the State of Israel later.
Yeah.
The Jewish people had an agency in Berlin. My father went up to this from our city, made a trip, and he applied for a visa for us to leave the country, the whole family.
Yeah.
And we got on this list. At the end of the year, actually in November of 1936, my younger sister Leah was born. And she had to be born at home because Jews weren't allowed in the hospital anymore. So it's just getting worse and worse, and we're waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, as the time goes on, which is now I think 1937, we're on the top of the list. Thank God, finally, we're packing, we're ready to leave.
Yeah.
And in the middle of packing, my father got a message. We got word that another man lower down on the list was going to be arrested the next morning. He had to get out of the country. We gave him your visa. And on the 29th of October, 2 Nazis showed up at my father's store, and they said, we've come for the old man, my grandfather, who was living with us. He was then 78 years old.
Yeah.
And they took him, and my father watched him walking down the street. And when he didn't come back, he went to his brother's house. His brother lived near the main police station, to try to find out what happened. The Nazis had arrested Polish Jews. My grandfather was born in Poland.
Right.
And my father went home, was very distraught. He made a package of blanket, warm clothing, prayer book, went to the police station and said, could you give this? Gave my grandfather's name, and the police said, you're too late. We've put them all on trains, we're sending them back to Poland. We don't want Jews in Germany. And then 10 days later, in the middle of the night, and 5 Nazis and the local police chief banged on our door. My father had to let them in. And the two things, they came to arrest him. And fortunately, 2 of the men watched him while he got dressed. We found out afterwards that in some cases, the Jews who were arrested that night were not even allowed to get dressed. Some of the other Nazis, they rampaged through our home, and my sister Ruth and I were standing at our bedroom door and were watching all of them as they're. My mother is in a state of shock.
Yeah.
This is, and then other relatives came. I think because of my grandfather, the family was probably kind of, in a way, informally, leader of the community. And other people came, and it seems that their husbands, fathers, nephews, sons, all the men between the ages of 16 and 60 who were Jewish had been arrested during the night.
Really?
And everybody is very distraught. And nobody knew what happened. So my mother was a remarkable lady. You're going to hear this. She was wonderful. My dad, too. They were really remarkable. My mother got dressed. She went across to the local police station, and she said, "Where's my husband?" And they said, "He's in the concentration camp of Buchenwald. If you want to get him out, get him a visa, because we just don't want Jews in Germany anymore."
So they said, as long as you get a visa, you can
leave.
Was that true to be true, or was that just a
No, it was true. It was true, because
if you got the visa,
you could leave.
You could leave, no problem. Okay. So how did you escape from Germany to France?
Well, the first thing is my mother got this phony visa.
Yeah.
Forged. It took a month to get it.
Yeah.
We were then evicted from our home. We went to live with my other grandfather, and it took my mother another 6 months to get another phony visa for us to get out. I will briefly mention that before we were allowed to leave, my mother had to sign over everything that we owned, bank accounts, etc., to the Nazis.
Before you left, so before you left Germany, they insist that you signed everything that you owned, worked for.
I have documents with my mother's signature on it.
Yeah.
So we left France with 10 marks each. That's like 10 pounds each.
Yeah.
And we were reunited in France, and which is a good thing, except we were poverty-stricken. But the reunification didn't last very long because the Second World War broke out.
Okay.
September 1939. And 2 French policemen came and arrested my father.
And why did they arrest your father then?
Because they said that it didn't matter that he was Jewish, didn't matter that he'd been in a concentration camp. He was a German citizen. And Germany was now the enemy because France was at war with Germany. And so he was interned. And so...
So he was then sent back to Germany?
No. The French established, they had internment camps because they arrested not only the German Jews, they also arrested German businessmen.
Yeah, right, okay.
And there was an informal division between the Jewish people in this camp and the Germans.
Right.
Conditions weren't as dire as they were in the concentration camps, but you're not free.
Yeah, of course.
And my mother's left with 3 little girls.
Oh, no.
So she found in the village where we were living, there's a long-standing Jewish organization. And they had realized what was happening. And they had bought up all kinds of buildings, and they created homes for Jewish children who were separated and otherwise displaced. And my mother placed us in this home. So, and this is.
So why did your mother place you in that home? Was that
because she was destitute?
Really? So she couldn't afford to sort of.
She had no way of looking after us. She had no money.
Oh.
The director of the home offered my mother the job of cook in the home.
Yeah.
Would she be interested in doing it?
She took it, obviously. Yeah.
She took it. Yeah. She took it because it gave her a little income. It gave her actually a little identity card from the village because she was illegal. This was another danger.
Oh.
And so she became a cook. And we used to kind of see at the end of the day for 5-10 days. Oh. So we weren't all that separated.
Yeah.
But meantime, the war's going on. And the Nazis who'd been fighting in Russia invaded Holland, quickly overran Holland and Belgium.
And did you know that this was happening? Or did news filter through to you that they were coming?
We were aware that the war activity had changed. Almost the day before they reached Paris, all the Jewish children, the Jewish homes were evacuated. It's like Nazis came in on one end of Paris, we got out the other end, and they had bought homes in central France for the children. And so we were evacuated to central France.
So now, obviously, you've been evacuated. You've moved out of Paris into central France. How did you and your family survive going forward from that moment?
Well, I have to say, we weren't living specifically under the Nazis. We were living under what was called Vichy France.
Right.
We are living under wartime conditions. The people who France was divided into the part that the Nazis wanted to control themselves, and the internal part was given to the French, and it was run by people who collaborated with the Germans. So we're living now, once the French surrendered, and by the way, when the French surrendered, they opened up, before they opened up the camps where my father was held. But there just wasn't enough food for the children, and we were hungry. And it's the main thing as far as being in France is concerned. But how did we finally escape, which was the question I think that you wanted to know.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you escaped from obviously Germany to go to France, and then I know from France, then you had to then.
What happened is that the Americans, in 1941, in the spring, they offered a very limited visa for Jewish children who were in French concentration camps, because there were children in concentration camps in France. And there was by then a resistance movement in France. But in 1941 they couldn't do it. And they've got several hundred visas. Visas are better than gold.
Really? Wow.
So they gave the visas to the homes. The children who were chosen to go were basically orphans, or where the whereabouts of the children were not known.
Right.
My parents were now with us because my father had made his way.
Yeah.
So about 3 days before everybody's ready to leave, 2 children got sick.
Right.
Lost their health clearance.
Yeah.
Got 2 visas.
Yeah.
Visas are precious.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Only 2 people could fill those visas.
Oh.
Because my parents were there, they could sign everything, they had all the papers.
Wow.
The compromise was that my sister Ruth and I would go.
Yeah.
And my sister Leah, she was too young, my mother wouldn't let her go, she stayed behind.
Oh.
So this is how we escaped. We arrived in New York in September 1941.
Yeah.
And we became foster children.
So what happened then when you arrived in America? Who was there to meet you? What was
the organization had a place where all of us were taken, and within days the children were spread all over the country. And my sister Ruth and I stayed in the New York area.
And you always stayed together with your sister, no matter what? Or was you separated from your sister as well?
Separated.
Oh. So yeah, obviously your parents are now still in France with your little sister.
Yeah. Tell
me what happened to them?
The French resistance workers took my sister to this Catholic convent, where she was hidden.
So they were looking after her, basically, looking after her, make sure she was okay.
So my parents were arrested. They were in French concentration camps. They managed to escape being sent being deported to Poland. We're a very unusual family.
Yeah.
The parents and the children in all different places. At one point we were, all 5 of us, we were in 5 different places, but we all survived. Very, very rare.
Incredible. So how did you end up coming together? What was that?
After liberation and the end of the war, it took some time. My parents, first of all, they got Leah back. And they came to New York. And it took almost a year more before they could find an apartment and we could all live together again.
Yeah. Come through a lot.
Yeah.
It's a crazy story.
Here we are. And
you, like, all five managed to come through it, which is like incredible. Your mum sounds like an amazing person.
Yeah. And of course,
she has some like,
and it's important to share this story of what happened.
Yeah, because this is what I want to move on to now. You obviously do the March of the Living, so you're going to tell me a bit about that. I've heard stories where people go back to. Yeah.
The March of the Living itself takes place on Yom HaShoah, the day of remembrance of the Holocaust. And on that day, all 10 or 11,000 of us walk the length of the camp of Auschwitz. We walk from one end of Auschwitz to the other. It's 3 kilometers.
3 kilometers.
And the march is along the railroad tracks, where the trains landed, the Jews who were deported, and many of whom were. And then there was a commemorative ceremony at the end.
So why is it so important for you to go back to do the March of the Living walk, even though COVID's not allowed you to go back to Warsaw, Auschwitz, and do the...
The March of the Living is a wonderful organization, and they arrange these interviews. They have other
it's fantastic, it's brilliant.
Programs, Zoom programs where they teach the history and feature other survivors. So what do you think, Ronnie? Would you come on March of the Living?
100%.
I would just love
100%.
for you to come.
I'm coming.
You're coming.
Next year, coming.
It would be fantastic, and bring some other people with you. People have to know, people have to learn this history so it doesn't happen again. And you've got a lot of witnesses here, and you're on film. You are coming.
I have to. I've signed.
You've signed.
That's better than
I'm going to come again.
What I've learned today, talking from Evie, is just the reality of what it was like. You know, you hear stories about it, but to hear the reality of the separation from a family, the upheaval, you know, just her experience, you know, just to feel it, you know. Like Evie said, you know, from her mother, she said, what we have to do is just to keep talking about it, you know, so people remember, people know what went on, and you know, and Evie's written a book about it, and it's just, you know, just to keep that alive. And for me, you know, I know a bit about it, but today I've learned so much more about it, and it's so much more important now that I feel like that I play my part in maybe trying to sort of encourage people to go on the march, and just, you know, because, you know, I have so many friends in the Jewish community, and just to know, and, you know, and you hear their stories, but just to kind of like keep that alive, if you like, and just educate people on what happened, and it never happens again, you know.